Hello, everybody, and welcome on into the Fox Sports The Gambler college football preview show. One day late for you guys because a certain member of this podcast was doubtful with illness yesterday. So a Wednesday edition previewing Week 4. Myself, Joe Tansey, alongside Ryan Beef Coyle and Mark Henry Jr. Guys, this is the week where college football realignment really hits home because the three marquee games are three games that have been significantly affected by conference realignment. Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's SEC debut in Norman. USC's first road game in the Big Ten at the Big House against Michigan. And Utah, Oklahoma State is a huge game in talking about the Big 12 title race. So it really is a kind of wrap your brain around realignment. And on top of that, the Pac-12 still alive. Alive and well, a beautiful thing to see. But guys, going into Week 4, you kind of feel like, okay, it's finally, for lack of a better term, nut cutting time in some of these conferences.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. This is, I think, where teams are going to start to kind of separate. You know, you got the Arkansas States and the South Alabama Tech, all those good guys. They're out of the picture now. We're starting to get into conference play. Start to learn about a lot of teams. Once we get into stock down, I'll hit on one team that I think we're going to look back at in 4 or 5 weeks from now and be like, how the hell were they ranked at this point in time? So, yeah, for sure, starting to get into the nitty-gritty. The bracketology talk is starting to come into fruition as well. So it's going to be a fun stretch as we go on to the rest of the season.
It feels like we know the real contenders in each conference now. And I think there's pretenders sprinkled in there. But I think we know we can kind of give the round number on how many teams we think can currently win each conference. And it's not a large number. It's probably a much smaller number than we would have said maybe in August. Now that we've seen some of the Arizonas and the Kansases and maybe the LSUs and obviously the Florida States and some other teams play, those numbers have shrunk big time. So I think that you're just going to keep seeing those numbers kind of shrink week by week. But obviously not to 4 this time, to 12. So it makes it a little bit more interesting.
So let's get right into it because our stock up, stock down for the college football playoff this week. We're going to skip the Heisman because nobody really kind of moved up and down. We'll have more on that next week when we have some movement within the conferences. But I'm going to start because I'm just going to go with one conference. I know it's kind of really the easy way out to pick the best conference in college football for my stock up. But that's what I'm going to do. Yeah. I'm taking the SEC as a whole as my stock up in the college football playoff. I can make a legitimate case now for 6 to 7 teams to make the playoff in the SEC, and I don't think we'd bat an eyelash at it. I really don't. Look, I know how the schedules play out, and I know there will be games, especially involving Georgia, where everything does shake out. But look, we have Georgia still at least in my mind, number 1, but they're number 2 in the polls. You have Texas, who has been utterly dominant. Quinn Ewers' injury, something worth monitoring, but they don't play a real game until the Red River Shootout on October 12th. Alabama, look, credit where it's due. I know Wisconsin, suffered an injury with Tyler Van Dyke early on in that game. Still went out and beat who they were supposed to beat. We'll find out a lot more about them against Georgia next week, a game we'll talk at length about. Mizzou, with the cupcake schedule that they have, definitely in the mix. Ole Miss is just beating the brains off of everybody. Wake Forest is scared to play them. That's how terrifyingly good they are. Tennessee, you have Nico, who is lighting the world on fire, and the hype train will only continue. I think I'm missing one more in that mix.
You could throw Oklahoma and LSU in there. I think we probably don't think they are. Here's what I'll say, though. I don't think LSU is that good, but here's what I'll say. You take a look at LSU's schedule, all of their tough games are in Death Valley. They are at LSU. We haven't – so far what we've seen from LSU, and I know we're all low on them, we saw them lose to USC, and that was in Vegas, obviously a neutral site. We saw them win at South Carolina, not look good doing so, but they won by a field goal. Probably should have lost. We could talk about refs later maybe there. But I had LSU, and I was like, "Oh, this is probably a badly officiated game towards South Carolina." But they haven't really played a tough game in Death Valley. We haven't seen if this team can rise to the occasion. There, you look at Nussmeier; he's been really good. Like for the most part, Nussmeier has stepped up to the plate. The defense has problems. You'd have to think when we get to an LSU home game, that defense probably plays a little bit better, plays a little bit more up to the level of the game. But you look at their games. You have UCLA. I didn't know that. I didn't know I was going to launch into an LSU thing here, but I was texting Beef about this the other day. You have UCLA, that's a win. You have South Alabama, that's a win. Then you have Ole Miss in LSU. Obviously, a really tough game. Then you go at Arkansas. Then you go at A&M. That A&M game kind of could be a swing game. It depends what Marcel Reese looked pretty good last week, but we don't know what A&M is yet. We don't know, losing to Notre Dame, who we don't know what they are. So it's tough to really judge A&M right now. Then you get Alabama at LSU. Obviously, tough game, but it's in Death Valley. At Florida, Vanderbilt at home. Then you get Oklahoma at home. Like, if you go 3-1, or not even three. Let's say the home games, 2-1 in the Ole Miss, Alabama, Oklahoma home games, which I think they'll be favored against Oklahoma. So it just means you have to win one of Alabama or Ole Miss at home. I think they're back in the mix, even if we don't think they're that good.
So I'll pose this question to you guys before we get into more of the stock up and down. 6 teams right now from the SEC have a viable path to the playoff. You just outlined a 7th with LSU. Hell, if Oklahoma gets their act together, they really haven't looked great the last 2 games, but they're still ranked in the top 15. And I mean, who the hell knows what happens against Nico and Tennessee this weekend? Until they're out, we got to consider them. So the ACC is a 1-bid league. That is pretty much confirmed unless Clemson comes out of nowhere and wins 10, 11 games. I think that's really their only path. The Big 12 is going to shake out really quickly in front of our faces the next 2 weeks, because not only does Oklahoma State play Utah, then they have to turn around and play Kansas State next week. So we're looking at a few elimination games in a row with Kansas State, Arizona. I think we can take Kansas completely out of the picture with their 2 ugly losses in a row to Illinois and UNLV. So if we're narrowing the bunch down pretty fast here, 12 teams get in, 11 from power conferences, unless there's a lot of might coming from the Big Ten over the next 2 months, I don't see the SEC cannibalizing itself to the extent of we're down to 4 teams. I genuinely think we're going to have a debate come mid-October, late October, where we're going to have 6 SEC teams in the mix. So the faux committee here, what do you do if 6 of the clear best teams in college football, the ones that we mentioned, Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Missouri, Ole Miss, and Tennessee, are all in playoff contention, all with 2 losses or less? The ACC is a 1-bid league. The Big 12 can cannibalize itself. Who knows what will happen in the Big 10, but there's still 3 spots left for them. Is the SEC potentially a 6-bid league?
I don't think it can get 6. I think 5 is probably the max, which is, by the way, why I'm kind of interested in looking at Bama plus 255 to miss the playoff. We're talking about all these teams in the SEC and how loaded it is. I don't think they can have 6 with 2 losses or less just by the natural scheduling of most of these teams playing each other. And you look at this Bama schedule, and it's brutal. Everyone's talking about Georgia's schedule being really tough. I'd argue Bama's is even tougher. It just doesn't have Texas on it. It has Georgia on it, but they play Georgia at home. Then later on in the season, they go to Tennessee. They get Mizzou at home. They go to LSU. They go to Oklahoma. And then Auburn, not a good team, but it is the Iron Bowl. So you have to probably just throw it out there and mention it. So I think that's a pretty nightmarish schedule, in my opinion, going to Tennessee and LSU and Oklahoma, having to play Georgia. It's having to play Missouri as well. That's 5 really tough games.
I think there's maximum 2 losses at Ole Miss, Missouri, and Tennessee if Tennessee beats Oklahoma. Yep. So that's kind of where I look at it is Bama looks really good. Georgia has to play Texas and Alabama, but is
And
still
Ole Miss.
Georgia and Ole Miss.
And Tennessee.
Right. So
it's tough. Yeah.
But if we're saying that Tennessee and Ole Miss lose those games to Georgia, right? And Tennessee, there's no upsets really with Tennessee, Mizzou, and Ole Miss. And then we have this little round robin of Georgia, Texas, and Alabama. Like, how do you sort it out if these teams are near level, right? It becomes a tricky process because, like we said, it's the best conference in college football. The ACC is shit. The Big 12, although it's going to be very entertaining, don't think there's going to be many top 15 teams. So then we're looking at Ohio State, Penn State, Oregon, maybe USC in the mix. My point is, I don't know if there's going to be enough contenders to say, well, we shouldn't put 6 teams in. If we're looking at this, look, a lot can happen. It's college football. Things can get weird. And the SEC is going to be a bear. But in our current viewpoint, I mean, it's a possibility. I think we have to start talking about it.
Well, I think it's weird too, or not weird. It's just different because this is the first year. Like, you have no data points to kind of use this off of, like, 6 teams have never made it before. Or however the committee's thinking, like, no, we're going to put the 6 best teams in. We don't care about spreading the wealth throughout the different conferences. If there's 6 or the 5 remaining at-large spots or the 5 best SEC teams, they could just give it to them. So it's kind of, pick your poison, have your take on it, but we have no data points to kind of sit back on from previous tournaments or previous brackets that could influence the committee or our judgment.
Which is why it's so fascinating. Yeah, go ahead.
The big question is how many Big Ten teams get in, because that determines the SEC more than anything. I think we think Ohio State gets in no matter what. So then it comes down to Oregon, Penn State, USC are the only other teams we think have a chance at getting in. Probably
Michigan makes a case if they beat USC somehow.
I'm not even considering Michigan personally.
I don't want to, but I have to cast a decent sized net.
Beef is right about Nebraska. Yeah,
Nebraska is going to be in the conversation ahead of that Ohio State game for sure.
I think Nebraska probably drops out after that Ohio State game, and
I would think so.
To close the year, but
we still have USC on the schedule down the stretch too, so that could be looked at. However USC season goes as a good win as well. I mean, I certainly think there's a path there for Nebraska. I think come Selection Sunday though, I'd say more likely be like that first team out. Mm-hmm. Rather than the last at-large team in.
I think the real question is USC and Penn State. What do we think they're getting in? Do we think they're real? I guess more so USC. I feel like Penn State, it's not really even worth talking about them yet until we see what they are in a real game. But USC, are we taking? Maybe this can segue in. I don't know if you guys want to, but are we taking them seriously as a playoff team?
I mean, only 2 games so far, but I think the biggest thing with them is it hasn't been talent. It's been basically effort and just willingness to tackle. And I don't care if it's middle school football, high school football, or FBS football. You put a shutout up on the board on the defensive side, you got something cooking there at least. Just the willingness to tackle, because that team does have 4- and 5-star guys all over. Now they have a good defensive coach in place, as well as guys that are in position to tackle and willing to tackle. That was kind of their biggest flaw last year, just the willingness on that side. And, Lincoln's always going to have a good offense in place at the end of the day too. So I certainly think so. I think this week, I'm sure we'll get into it more, but this game is really going to decide my opinion on them. Do they get manhandled at the line of scrimmage, or what do they show up and look like in the big house? Because it really is, I think, a last-ditch effort here for Michigan to right the ship and potentially, go on a run to make themselves a playoff team. But I think that's more of a team that's going to be fighting for a bowl game at the end of the season.
I think it's can they play a grinded out Big Ten game, because they're going to have to play a few of those. All right, so we got a little derailed there, but not a bad thing, because I think that's the biggest topic right now. We got Georgia-Bama coming up next week, and that's kind of where my brain's at. The SEC is really damn good, but we all knew that. Beef, who's your stock up in terms of the college football playoff?
I'll go with K-State. I think that was one of the more impressive performances of the weekend. We know that they're going to be able to run the ball and score the ball, but what they did on defense as well, shutting down that high-flying Arizona attack, 38-7 win. Really impressive. And I think it's a great spot for them. All they got to do is get by BYU this week. BYU has started out a little bit better than anticipated, I think. You go on the road, so never an easy primetime type game. You just got to get by this week. And then you get Oklahoma State next week at home, coming off what is most likely going to be a war against Utah. So I think it's a great spot for K-State, probably be favored by at least a score in that one as long as they win this week. And then you look at the rest of the schedule: at Colorado, at West Virginia, versus Kansas, at Houston, versus Arizona State, versus Cincy. I think they're favored the rest of the way, and then they finish up with at Iowa State. We'll see how Iowa State's season goes the rest of the way, but I think there's a path where K-State's favored the rest of the way, and they could run the table, potentially be an undefeated regular season and head into the Big 12 as one of your top 4 seeds, or into the conference championship weekend as one of those top 4 seeds.
There might be a road game that trips them up. I don't know which one, but they're very good at home. And I think that has to be taken into account of where they stand with Oklahoma State, because getting them into Manhattan next week is huge. I think whatever the Kansas State number is, you kind of have to think about taking that, right? Because it is going to be a war, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how the Big 12 plays out. Mark, who do you got for your stock up in the college football playoff this week?
I'm going to go a little bit off the board. I'm going with the team that's not in the top 25 right now. They only had 6 votes to get into the top 25 right now, but they're sitting at 3-0, and they had a kind of crazy comeback win against TCU. They were down 13 late last week, and they're the first team in the Big 12 to put up a conference win on the board, UCF, with KJ Jefferson and RJ Harvey. And that running game that Gus Malzahn has worked up there is dangerous. And the guy, say what you want about Gus Malzahn, when he gets a running quarterback and when he gets a running game going, he usually gets it going. And you look at this UCF schedule, maybe in the preseason it looked a little tougher than it does now. You got Colorado coming up after they have a week off this week, sitting at 3-0. Colorado, at Florida, Cincinnati, a big game at Iowa State. I'm a little lower on Iowa State than consensus, so I think that's a very winnable game for UCF. BYU, Arizona at home. Arizona not as good as we thought. At Arizona State, at West Virginia. West Virginia not as good as we thought. And Utah at home. I think that's a pretty manageable schedule for UCF to potentially get into this Big 12 title game conversation. I'm kind of talking myself in as Kansas drops out, as Arizona drops out, even West Virginia as like a fringe potential kind of Big 12 contender drops out. Someone's got to jump in, and I think UCF TCU was a little bit of a kind of a playoff game to kind of get that spot as a little bit of a wild card for the rest of the year. I kind of walked out of that game feeling better about UCF and TCU.
I'm going to go a little off the board as well for my stock down. And my stock down is Northern Illinois, because I look at what the Toledo Rockets just did against Mississippi State. Looked really good in the MAC. I also think the MAC's not going to have a shot at the group of 5 spot. I think a team of Memphis's caliber is going to have a really, really strong chance. I don't care what the win over Florida State means or what it doesn't mean. That's a veteran ball team right there. And the fact that they went in there and played really well from the start against Florida State, set the tone with the first fumble on the first drive. Seth Hennigan's a veteran quarterback. Now, this goes against everything that I'm going to say at the end of this show, because there's a huge spot that goes against Memphis this week. Hint, hint, Service Academy. But I think Memphis is got to be in the driver's seat. And I don't think Northern Illinois is going to be here for long. They're propped up because of the win over Notre Dame. But I genuinely think that the way Toledo, and this also goes against what I'm going to say about Toledo later on, but I think the MAC is going to be strong enough where Northern Illinois just kind of gets washed into the river here. And a team like Memphis in the AAC or Boise from the Mountain West ends up getting the group of 5 spot and not the MAC.
I think Boise is definitely going to be an interesting one, especially if Oregon kind of plays their way out of whatever their kind of slump is. And I think we saw them start to do that last week. That 3-point loss at Oregon is going to look better and better and better, where it's to the point where I think them going 11-1 It could even get in over like a 12-0 team if a team's schedule isn't necessarily as good. And not a lot of games left on the schedule that scare you for Boise besides next week against Wazoo.
Yeah, I kind of feel bad for Memphis because I think going into the season, that was the game like I pointed to. I was like, if they get that one, I think there's a good chance they go 12-0, and they're sitting there looking like the best team of the group of 5. That could be looked at as a win against like a 3-9 team at the end of the season for how Florida State's looked so far. So I think that could get used against them. One team I'd say keep an eye out for too. I know it's 2 wins over 2 Big 12 teams that probably are going to have great seasons, but UNLV, I think last year they had a really strong year. Really great team against the spread too, 13-4 over the past 2 years. Just not write that one down, but I think they play Boise as well, so that could be a big time head-to-head, and then potentially meet up with them again in the Mountain West championship game. So keep an eye out for UNLV as one of those long shot kind of dark horses as we go on throughout the season.
Yeah, they hopped on everybody's radar after that Friday night win over Kansas. Barry Odom, one hell of a coach. Beef, your stock down for the college football playoff is?
All right, so I'm going to go with a team that's actually 3-0, number 15 in the nation, Oklahoma.
Yep, they suck.
Yeah, you might say, why is that team stock down for being 3-0? I watched a lot of that Temple game that they beat them 51-3, and you'd be like, how are you going to say anything bad about that? Well, Temple turned it over 6 times. Oklahoma in that game only went 1 of 12 on third down. Jackson Arnold hasn't thrown for over 200 yards in any of the 3 games so far. Had a dogfight against Houston, 16-12 win, who UNLV beat 27-7. And then that game against Tulane last week, Tulane had a good comeback towards the end, and Oklahoma kind of had a backbreaking touchdown down the stretch. But you look at Oklahoma's schedule.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. Tulane, I had Tulane plus 13.5.
Yeah, so did I. But Oklahoma's schedule the rest of the way. Host Tennessee this week. They're a 7-point home dog at Auburn. You never know what Auburn's going to show up as. But then you have Texas, South Carolina, who looks pretty competent, maybe like a 7-5, 8-4 team, at Ole Miss. Then you get Maine at home, at Mizzou, versus Bama, and at LSU. I think you could put that right up there with Florida and Georgia potentially as the toughest schedules the rest of the way. I think even sitting here at 3-0, it could be a struggle for Oklahoma to be bowl eligible. And they're my team I was talking about earlier, where we're going to look 3-4 weeks from now and be like, how the hell was that the number 15 team in the country? I just don't think that they're built for the SEC yet, nowhere close to what Texas was as they transitioned over. So Oklahoma stock down for sure.
I think the gap between Nico and Jackson Arnold is massive. And I think that's what ends up being on display on Saturday night. Look, I watched a decent amount of that Tulane game the second half, and Tulane came back on them. They've gotten some ground. And look, Houston is viewed as one of the worst Power 4 teams in the entire country. And they got into a rock fight with Oklahoma. So, yeah, I am not sold at all on Oklahoma. I don't think the primetime boost, I don't think the game day boost, I think that does absolutely nothing for it. I think Tennessee is just an absolute machine. Mark, your stock down in the college football playoff is?
I'm scrambling a little bit because I was ready to go with Oklahoma there. That was bad prep by Mark. But I'll go ahead and I'll talk about Texas A&M. And you'd say, why talk about Texas A&M? They just came out and won. I'll say, how was Marcel Reese not starting going into this season? Connor Wegman stinks. That's all I wanted to say. That's all I wanted to get that off my chest. How does Mike Elko, this kind of guy we're talking about as a genius, who did come out and beat Florida, I'll give him credit. That's like, beating a dead body at this point. But how do you go with Wegman over this guy? He looks so much more interesting. And that's another wrinkle in the SEC. It's going to kind of come down to the LSUs, the A&Ms, the Oklahomas, I guess like that mid tier of the SEC. How many games against the big dogs are those teams going to win? So it's kind of determine how many teams can get it, because those are kind of the teams that have to at least pop those teams for a couple wins. But that's not really, I guess their stock is necessarily up because their quarterback's good. But I also could argue their stock's down because their coach is an idiot for not playing them.
All right, so let's get into the Week 4 slate. 3 big games, obviously. We've hinted at all of them so far. But let's get to the betting angles of them. Tennessee at Oklahoma. This number, compared to where it was preseason, has flipped dramatically. I don't know how much stock you want to put into that. I specifically don't, because it's all guesswork. We don't know how good these teams are, and the lines right now are probably a much better representation of where we stand. It's also why I hate betting lines in the 3 weeks in the future, because you never know what's going to happen. Tennessee's a 7-point favorite. I think deservedly so. I think if you bet them anything within a touchdown, it's a slam dunk here. And look, we know Nico is the superior quarterback, but we haven't talked about Tennessee's defense. They're pretty damn good as well. And you have a quarterback in Jackson Arnold who's turnover prone. He suffered 9 sacks already this season. That's a defense that's going to get after him. And I think that's going to make the difference in this game. You need defense to win championships, and that's the old adage, and it's cliche. But I really think that's the difference here with Tennessee. I don't think Josh Heupel's had this good of a defense during his tenure. Combine that with an all-world quarterback, I think this is a great game for Tennessee to make a huge statement in.
Yeah, I agree. This is my my Texas-Michigan version of Week 4 dog walking of the week. I think Tennessee's going to go in there and absolutely roll them. We just talked about how out I am on Oklahoma. I think that gets exposed on center stage. And I think if you're in that camp as well, Mark, I'm hopping on the train with you. I think you should put in a future on this team to win it all. I think talent-wise, they're up there. I'm still intrigued to see. This is Nico's first road start, so I'm interested to see that. I don't think it's that big of a test with Oklahoma, but I'm still intrigued to see how he fares against some of these bigger SEC opponents. But I took them at 20-1 last week during that Kent State game. It's now down to 14-1, and I think if they go into Oklahoma and beat up on them like many of us expect them to, that number is going to go down to probably 10-1. Talent-wise, these guys are up there with just about anyone. They can compete on both lines of scrimmage. They have a big-time playmaker at QB and a badass coach in Heupel. I think he's an awesome coach. Dylan Sampson, a really good running back. It's about as complete of a team as you can get. So I think look at them if you think they're just going to win this game, potentially take that national title ticket now, because that number is just going to keep going down. This could be the number 1 team in the nation after that Alabama game. I really think that if they continue to roll the way that they are.
You can find a 16-1 out there. I think there's value there.
I agree. I think there's plenty of value on that. I'd also take the under in this game, under 57. Look, the Tennessee score lines are what stand out, right? And 71-0 against Kent State, who, by the way, is a 49-point underdog in Happy Valley this weekend. That speaks more about how bad Kent State is. I believe the Athletic ranked them 134th this week in their overall ranking, 1 to 134. Look, I think the key here, I've just said it, is Tennessee's defense. Oklahoma has just played in 2 grinded out type of games. They haven't given up a ton of points to Houston and Tulane, but they didn't blow them out either. I think it's kind of a combination of everything we've seen from these teams so far. Look, Tennessee is going to put up points. I don't know if Oklahoma can. I see something around like the 30-14, 31-17 type game. It's going to be, I think, a feeling out process at the start. And then I think we see Tennessee run away with it. But I think we're going to come away talking about Nico more. But I think the star of the show is going to be the Tennessee defense.
I am a little concerned, though. It feels like I have not heard a single person in the world be on Oklahoma.
Yeah.
The guys on the Chris Fallica, the Bears college football bets pod are all on Oklahoma because kind of that reason. That everyone's on Tennessee.
I mean, look, it's college sports. You never know what you're going to get. I mean, I don't know if I would go ahead and say that's the reason why you should do it, but I see the 2 units. I've watched a little bit of Oklahoma the last 2 weeks, and nothing really impresses me. Now, if that number starts to move up, then you can maybe convince me to take Oklahoma within maybe at like 10, but I don't think I'll get that high.
I think Tennessee. I don't really have much to add, to be honest. You guys covered it pretty well. But, yeah, I think the defense is the difference maker. Heupel's never had this type of defense and he's never had a player like James Pierce on the defense because not many come around. So I think Tennessee takes care of business here against Oklahoma. I host a podcast with Shane Haff, who does Eagles content, a really good Eagles follow. He is a big Oklahoma fan. He's actually from Oklahoma. So he's a diehard. I do a podcast with him breaking down college football prospects. And I told him to his face, I was like, I'm sorry. I think you're getting spanked this week. I think Tennessee is coming into town for Oklahoma's first SEC game, and I think they win by multiple touchdowns.
Yeah. Let's talk about some other line movement. Utah at Oklahoma State. So Cam Rising, the latest we have is that he's playing, and Cam Rising is apparently worth 2 to 3 points on the spread because this number opened up over the weekend. Oklahoma State was favored. I've seen it as high as 2.5 in Utah's favor. Utah is now a 1.5 point favorite against the Pokes in Stillwater. Can we trust Cam Rising to stay healthy for a big game? I think that's the biggest question around Utah.
I love.
It's a finger injury too, which kind of concerns me on the throwing hand. I mean, when you're playing the quarterback position, I feel like that's a important thing. For this game, though, at home, Gundy has been great as a dog. I think I saw he's 14-14 straight up since he took over in 2005 as a home underdog, and 16-11. Sorry, it's 16-11-1 as a home underdog against the spread. 14-14 straight up as a home underdog, which is 9th best in the country and 4th best amongst Power 4 schools. So he's been great in these spots at home. For me personally, though, I really am concerned about Ollie Gordon. I remember watching that game against Arkansas a couple weeks ago, and I was like, wow, he looks slow behind the line of scrimmage, and he's only averaging 3.4 yards per carry. Though all those touches last year might have added up. I think he's the key in this game to kind of expose Utah's defense a little bit in this one. So he needs to get going. I'm a little bit worried about that. I don't know if I'm going to bet this one because I have Oklahoma State at plus 650 to make the playoff. I kind of might just be rooting for them to win this game, but Cam Rising with the hand and the finger, that could be something that we see him go out there for a few series, bothers him a little bit too much, and we get Zach Wilson's brother back in for Utah.
There's a bunch of 10-year players in this game. It's the Perry Ellis Invitational. Keep an eye. I know we talked about Ollie Gordon, and we make a lot about the quarterbacks being there forever, but Brennan Presley's been there forever too, the wide receiver at Oklahoma State. We're looking at difference makers that may not be the obvious ones. Oklahoma State's defense hasn't been anywhere close to exceptional in the first few weeks of the season. Are they going to have to air it out and match a healthy Rising or Isaac Wilson, whoever it may be? But I think in this case, they're going to turn to their veterans. I think Presley is a guy to kind of circle going into it, to potentially have a big game to connect with Alan Bowman, because Oklahoma State's going to need a little diversity in their offense. It can't just be all Ollie Gordon. It can be. He's shown in the past that he's capable of it. But I think you turn to a guy like Presley, and then you look to that wide receiver core to come in and make a little bit of an extra difference in a game that you got to pour everything into before you can worry about K-State. Because if you don't win this one, next week becomes a lot less significant. So that's the way I look at it. I'm kind of undecided, though. I think Oklahoma State can win this game, but their defense gives me concerns on actually betting them.
They're either my biggest bet or my second biggest bet this weekend. I love Oklahoma State. You look at Cam Rising, he's 13-0 at home. He's played the same amount of games on the road and neutral. How many of those do you think he's won?
6-7.
7-6. 7-6 as on the road or in neutral spots. And you look at Utah in general, so good at home. Just classically so tough to beat at home. I do not think they lose a home game this year if you go look at their schedule. But they're 2-7 in their last 9 ranked road matchups. And the 2 wins are against USC teams that closed the year at 7-5 and 4-8. So they're kind of fake ranked road wins. So they haven't had a real ranked road win since 2016. And then on the other side of things, Beef might have said this stat. It was he said the 14-14 stat, but since 2016 also, Mike Gundy 9-1 as a home dog. Crazy numbers there. I think this is just such a classic Gundy spot, such a classic Whittingham kind of lose spot before they win 8 in a row, and then they'll be 9-1. Like, it just feels classic that Oklahoma State wins here and then maybe lets down next week and loses. And they kind of can. If you win this game, if you're Oklahoma State, you can probably lose against Kansas State next week and be fine.
Potentially. I mean, but you got to bake in the one or two Gundy losses that come out of nowhere.
You put yourself in a spot that you can't
Yeah.
Gundy, but
which is it's impossible because Gundy's going to do that. I feel like what we're doing, and this is, it's not a shot. It feels like we do this with a lot of teams. It's like a flow chart. Is this team on the road? Do you bet them? No. Is this team at home? Do you bet them? Yes. Utah's got a little bit of that vibe to them. There's a bunch of them. It's weird. It applies a lot more in college football than it ever will in the NFL. But I think in these specific instances, yeah, there's some, you can break out the flow chart and kind of copy and paste on what exactly to get out of those teams. The Big Ten has a big game this week. USC at Michigan. That feels really weird. Like really, really weird to say that's a Big Ten game. So Michigan's going with a quarterback change. Alex Orji is in for Davis Warren. I don't know about the timing of that. We'll see. USC starting off the season high. Miller Moss looks pretty good. The defense under new defensive coordinator D'Anton Lynn looks very impressive. What the hell do we make of this game? I feel like it's a grinded out Big Ten type of game. The odds makers are very decidedly in USC's favor. The spread's 5.5. What kind of game are we getting here, boys?
I think you look at the under in this one. I think Michigan learns from what happened to Texas when Texas went up there. And they tried to, I'm not going to say get cute, but they tried to trust Davis Warren and tried to throw the ball a little bit. I really think that they're going to go into this game and say, we're going to make USC come in here and beat us 10-7. We're going to do everything we can to just keep the ball on the ground, keep the ball on the ground, keep the ball on the ground. You look at Orji coming in at quarterback, his fatal flaw, he can't throw the ball. That's a bit of an issue as a quarterback. But I think it also gives you not an advantage, but the chance to just get into third and manageable. Yeah. If he gets into a scenario where it's 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, he can use his legs to potentially get you a first down. They're just going to want to keep the clock rolling, keep USC off the field on offense as much as possible. And I do think still they have the advantage up front against USC. I know I was talking about them earlier and how they have the talent and they've shown the willingness to tackle and stuff now, be in better position. But I still think Michigan isn't going to necessarily let what happened in the Texas game happen. And that was, they got cute a little at the beginning throwing the ball. Texas was able to expose them with a couple of quick touchdowns, and it was all over from there. They have to keep this as low scoring and as slow as possible. And it's still the big house. I mean, I do have USC winning this game. I think that they'll cover, but I do think Michigan puts up a much better fight than the Texas game. But we see a real low scoring, ugly Big Ten game. And Michigan basically says, USC, welcome to the Big Ten. You're going to have to win this way eventually. Let's see if you can do it now.
I actually, when I first saw the number, leaned to Michigan. And that was before the quarterback
These
news.
are my two least favorite. I cut out there.
You're still there. Oh, we lost Mark. So I looked at this line initially, Beef, and saw 5.5. And I'm like, I think this is a Michigan line. Now, I don't know. I'm not a fan of changing the quarterback before a big game. I think you do this maybe before like a Maryland or Nebraska, or maybe not Nebraska anymore, but Maryland or Illinois, one of those types of teams. I'm not sold. I think I'm going to stay far away from this game. I think the mindset of the under is probably the best way to go, but it's 44. I mean, that's a toughie. I just don't know where Michigan's points are going to come from. I think that's the problem. Mark, you're back in. Tie the bow here on Michigan USC.
I think this is a USC beatdown spot. And these are my two least favorite teams in the country. So I can promise there's no bias because I hate them both equally. But I think USC, this is kind of, I remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Tennessee, NC State. And to me, that was obviously a much different type of team than Michigan. But I said, this was my prove to me you're a playoff team game for Tennessee. This is kind of that for USC. Prove to me you belong in those playoff conversations and take care of a Michigan team that can't complete a forward pass in 2024. And I think they will. And the best thing is, like, you get down in this game. What are they going to be down 10-0, 13-0? Like, I think Lincoln Riley can get a couple touchdown drives together if they're down 13-0 at halftime even. Like, I just don't think Michigan can pull away. So no matter what, I think you're in this game if you take USC. I think you have a way better, and this isn't how you should bet necessarily, but I think you have a way better chance of looking in the mirror and feeling like an idiot if you bet Michigan than you do if you bet USC. There's not a lot of scenarios to me that Michigan's winning this game by more than 3. And I think there's not a lot of scenarios they're winning the game, period. You look at these USC receivers, and I understand how good Michigan's cornerbacks are. Will Johnson's one of the best players in the country. But Texas was able to make stuff happen, and I'd argue USC might have even better receivers than Texas does. And you look at how good Miller Moss has been. I'm just buying into USC, and it pains me to say it.
Let's do a quick spin around the rest of the college football landscape. There's plenty of other plays to get in that we will get in before Saturday and the game's lock. But what has your attention? Let's say a Money in the Crumbs type game. I only say this because I got potentially a few of them. What are you guys looking at outside of the big games?
One Money in the Crumbs game, I guess you could consider that. I'm going to go to Penn State, Kent State. I took Tennessee minus 30.5 first half last week against Kent State, and it was 37-0 at the end of the first. I think Penn State coming off a bye, especially with what happened against Bowling Green, they come out in this one ready to go, raring to go. I mean, Kent State just lost 71-0. I cashed in on them live at plus 81.5 at one point in a college football game. But I just think that's a defeated kind of beat down team. And I know that they got blown out so bad last week, but they were just getting destroyed at the line of scrimmage. I think Penn State pushes them around, and it's a scenario where is Penn State USC next week? Is that the 28th?
I believe it's 2 weeks from now.
Okay. But yeah, so I mean, I just think Penn State puts the foot on the gas early. The full
3
game
weeks
spread,
from now.
Okay, the full game spread is 49. I think they could cover that as well, but they're going to get up by 6 touchdowns, I think, in the first half. So I'll just ride with that minus 30.5 in the first half.
Do you take the first half number of 30.5? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Okay. I missed it. I was checking Penn State's schedule, so
yeah, that was my play. 30.5 in the first half. Because that's what I took for Tennessee the week before.
My bad. I zoned out. I was in the middle of checking the Penn State schedule to make sure we were right there. A lot of zoning out being done here these days. I'll give you guys a big one here. Actually, I'll give you a few because I've done some research on these, and I want to get your guys' opinion at Group of 5. I like the Southern Miss Jacksonville State over 60. Jacksonville State, they don't have a defense. They absolutely do not have a defense. They rank in the bottom 10 in every defensive metric. Take a wild guess who Southern Miss's quarterback is, guys.
Not Frank Gore's son anymore. Running Wildcat down there.
Who is it?
Tate Rodemaker.
I thought you were going to say Martell.
Martell, yeah.
This is a game where it should be a ton of offense. Jacksonville State has played zero defense all season long, the over 60. I'd gladly take that. There's a few other spots I want to mention. Colorado State is -9 against UTEP. I bet UTEP. I bet against UTEP last week against Liberty. They could not get the ball in the end zone, and that's against Liberty, who I don't rate too highly in the Group of 5 conversation. I think Colorado State is a much tougher team. I'd take them at -9. I think that's a bounce back spot for them. And 2 spots potentially for letdowns. One is Tulane at Louisiana. Look at the Cajuns at +3. The reason I say that is Tulane just came off of 2 really tough games against K-State and Oklahoma. And then Navy +9 against Memphis. Just look, it's not exactly going to be the easiest play because Memphis is very good and they've seen the triple option before. But, man, that seems like a really tough one to get up for right away. You end up having a big win at Florida State. I don't care what Florida State is. It's still beating Florida State. You have to go to Annapolis and face the triple option. That's going to be a tough one. Maybe Navy in the first half. But those are a few that have caught my attention at the Group of 5 level.
I think with Oklahoma State right there, this isn't really money in the crumbs, but an unranked matchup. With Oklahoma State, this is my other favorite bet of the week. I know that they gave up a heartbreaking kind of thing that I talked about earlier with UCF, but I love TCU this week at SMU. TCU
The Iron Skillet.
Yeah, on the road here, and I'm taking TCU. I also like the team total over 30.5. Fun stat: they've scored 31 plus in 10 straight years against SMU, and they might have their best quarterback that they've had in any of those years. I know that they've had a couple good ones, and obviously the name that's Max Duggan had a great career there. Josh Hoover is third in all of college football in passing, only behind Jackson Dart and Cam Ward. Josh Hoover, no interceptions as well. One of the best quarterbacks in the country so far this year. And he closed last year playing really well. I think this TCU team is going to be a really, really good offense all year long. The defensive side of the ball is another conversation for sure. But I haven't seen anything from SMU that shows me they're going to be able to take advantage of that against Nevada or BYU. The offense didn't look good in either of those games.
They have not.
I bet UCF against TCU, and I loved UCF in that game. But UCF had the offense to kind of take advantage of TCU's problems, especially on the ground. I don't see SMU being able to do that. They don't really have anyone that they have no running game. It's all on their passing game, and it hasn't been that great. So I really like TCU in this spot, potentially my favorite bet of the week.
I want to hit you guys with two quick things on the way out involving teams that were in the spotlight last week. First and foremost, does Florida State, can they get it together? They're only a 2.5-point favorite against Cal. By the way, I came across this week. Cal Twitter is apparently off the rails. Incredible. With playing teams in the South now. They went all after Auburn fans, and they're going after Florida State already. Can Florida State get it together, or are they destined for 0-4?
I think if you bet Florida State at any point the rest of the season, you're a sucker. That's terrible. That is the most. I can't wait though for that game against Florida. I think that game might just result in 2 fights, just punches being thrown, helmets taken off, like the F it, screw it, our season sucked bowl. I mean, that is going to be an absolute S show, I think, at the end of the day. But yeah, you're a sucker if you bet on Florida State the rest of the year. I don't care. You don't.
I considered it this week.
You don't have to bet against them, but you can't bet for them the rest of the year. And I also thought it was funny, DJU, I was looking at his stats today, 666 passing yards on the year. He's the devil that ruined Florida State football.
I looked at it real quick, and I considered it for a second.
The interesting thing about Cal, and I'm not going to read all the Justin Wilcox underdog numbers. I'll just tell you that
which are
Justin
fantastic.
Wilcox, really good as an underdog is what I'll tell you. But fun fact about Cal, obviously they go down to Auburn and they won that game as a big underdog on the road. Their best player coming into this year was very clearly Jaden Ott, who was a guy who's getting NFL looks as a running back. He's got 2,300 yards over 2 seasons. In that game against Auburn, he had 10 carries for 11 yards and got hurt in the first half. So they did all of that against Auburn on the road without their best player. He missed the game after that. He's coming back for this game. So I think that Cal might potentially be a sneaky team. So I like Cal to take care of business here. And even if I didn't think they were a sneaky team, I might like them to take care of business against this corpse of Florida State.
One more. Kansas State going out to Provo. Not saying it's a tough game. It's just it's a trap spot is what it is. It is 100% the trap spot of the week going out to Provo. It's the only night game. It's on ESPN. Everybody's watching. You just beat Arizona. You got OK State coming up. Do you fall into the trap, or you just let this one be?
Let the Mormons handle it. I'm not touching this one.
Yeah, I'm probably not touching this one, but Chris Kleiman against the spread wagon, number 2 since he took over. I think it is kind of weird, though, how it's the same number as that Arizona game. Certainly a look-ahead spot and could be a fall-flat spot. I'm actually going to New Orleans this weekend, going to be on Bourbon Street, so I think I might have to wager if this is the only game on TV, but we'll see how Saturday goes.
That is, I saw that, and I'm like, that's just the biggest trap spot of the century there for them. It's going to be tough, but that's just how college football is. You have all those spots throughout the season. Well, that wraps up our week 4 preview here on The Gambler. For Mark Henry Jr., Ryan Beef Coyle, I am Joe Tansey. We'll be back on Tuesday next week for our week 5 slate. I think I know what game we're going to be talking about, guys. Georgia and Alabama. Very excited for that. Best of luck on your bets, everyone, and we will talk to you next week.